Hey guys, I'm Matthew, your VB tutor. So we're going to create two different methods for sending emails. We'll jump into a Visual Basic Editor and we'll create the first module, which will be mod Outlook. This module is going to use Outlook to send emails. So we're going to create a routine that's just going to send an email using Outlook that's installed on the computer. One of the points that I've come across just in recent times is that more recent installations of Windows and the Office suite actually has quite a few issues with this method because the Outlook that's installed is the new version of Outlook, which isn't the desktop version and therefore doesn't actually install the object library. So use this method sparingly to send emails unless you're 100% sure that the environment that you're using this in is going to absolutely have the desktop version of Outlook installed. So in here, we're going to create a subroutine for public sub send email Outlook. This is going to take a few parameters, so we'll use byval subject string, and we'll have the email body HTML, because as Outlook can use HTML, we make sure that we pass in HTML string. We'll have byval recipient as string. This is the person you're sending the email to. We'll have an optional byval CC as string. This is going to be the person that we might CC the email to. Optional byval display email as boolean. So that's false. We don't want to actually display the email to the user when they're sending it because they've essentially created it in Excel themselves. So they don't necessarily need to see it in Outlook, but we have the option there for them. Optional byval, we're going to have attachments available so that we can send attachments using the email. We want it as a variant because we have two different ways that we can pass attachments to it. We can pass a single attachment, which is going to be coming in as a string. But if we pass it in as a collection, we can have a collection of attachment items. So by declaring variant and then handling it within the routine, we can actually have two different ways of passing that information to the routine. In here, we'll have a quick indication of the difference between early and late binding. So here we'll use olapp as outlook.application. If you want to use this as late binding, then you'd need to just declare this as object. So the reason that you'd use early binding over late binding, early has access to the IntelliSense. So when you're writing code, you can do olapp dot and then you have all this information on the different methods that are associated with that object. If you use late binding, you lose all that IntelliSense, but your objects still interact with those different methods the same way. The reason you might not want to use early binding like this is because we need to have a reference to the Microsoft Outlook object library. If you send this to someone and they don't have this exact same version of the object library, then they're going to have issues with your code. By doing late binding, you don't need this object library enabled, and it will just automatically reference the information that it needs. So we'll just use early binding for this routine, and we're going to use late binding for the SMTP method. We use dim ol, and we'll also need a mail item, so we use mail as outlook.mail item. Now, if the user already has Outlook open, we don't necessarily want to open up a new version of Outlook. So we use on error, resume next, and we're going to set the olapp equal to get object. So this is going to get an existing version of Outlook if it exists, outlook.application. And on error go to 0, reset the error handling. Then we can check if olapp equal is nothing. This says that we've checked this and it's determined that they don't have Outlook open already, so we have to create a new Outlook object. So we'll do set olapp equals create object outlook.application. If you're exclusively using early binding, then you can just set this olapp equals to new outlook.application, like so. These two things have the same effect. But if you use this method, then if you ever want to change to late binding, all you have to do is change it in your declaration like that. Then we need to set the mail object. So we set OL mail equals to OL app, create item, and the type of item is going to be an OL mail item. So this is going to be the email that we're actually creating. So with the OL mail object, set the recipient to recipient. Because the CC is an optional parameter here, we can do if not is missing CC, then .cc equals the CC variable. We also want to set the subject, so .subject equals subject variable. .html body, this is the body of the email, so this is going to be our email body HTML variable, which we've passed in here. And for our attachments, as I mentioned before, this could come in as a string or it could come in as a collection. So we need to check for that. So first we want to check if it's missing. If it's missing, then we don't need to actually do anything with it. Then we check if it is an object. So if is object, v attachments. If it's an object, then that means it's come in as a collection. And then we can do else. That's going to mean that it's come in as a string and end it. So if it has come in as a string, we just need to check that the file exists. So it's just saying that this is a file path. This is, say, C, my folder, test.pdf. So it's checking that if this file exists. So if it doesn't exist, then the string it will return is just a blank string. If it does exist, then it will probably have the file name in here as the variable. So then we can use attachments.add, and we add that attachment file. If it is an object, then we've got a collection of attachments. So we've possibly got 20 different attachments that are to the email. So we need to loop through that collection. So we do dim attachment adds variant, do for each attachment in the attachments, and do next attachment, and we check if that file exists. Then we do attachments.add, and we just have to make sure that we convert that to a string. So because this could represent an object of the v-attachments collection. So just make sure we convert that to a string, otherwise this might cause an error. Right, so we've added all our attachments in if they do exist. Next thing is going to be if we want to display the email. So this is a parameter that we pass in here. So display email. So if display email, then we use .display, else we just immediately send it. Then the last thing to do is just to make sure that we clean up those existing objects. So set OL mail nothing, set OL app equals nothing as well. All right, so this is our routine to send an email via Outlook. So let's do a quick test routine. So we'll do sub test Outlook. We'll call that and we'll say subject is new email. The body is hello from VBA. Recipient is going to be tutor@outlook.com. Now, just for testing purposes, I want to display the email first. We'll set display email to true. And then we can run that. And there you see that we've created an email object in Outlook. We've set who we're sending it to, the subject, hello from VBA as the body. And then the user can possibly just press send themselves if they'd like to. If we wanted to send immediately, then we close that. We remove display email from that, and we just press run. That immediately sends, practically instantaneously, and then in a moment I should receive that email in my inbox. And there you see we've received the email from Snowy42, that's my personal email, and your VB tutor at Outlook. Next, we're going to have a look at SMTP. So we'll create a new module called mod SMTP. SMTP stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. What this essentially means is that we're going to be able to send an email directly from a mail server rather than interacting with Outlook itself. In this case, we're going to use Gmail as our mail server. Now, what's important with Gmail is that you can't use your default password because you're going to have to provide the SMTP server with an indication of who you are. This is going to be your email address, and then you'll need what's called an app password. To get an app password, you'll need to go to myaccount.google.com/app passwords. Keep in mind that you'll actually need to make sure that your account has two-factor authentication and I believe a phone number registered. If you don't have these things, then this page won't show up for you. Once you're in the app passwords section, then we just create a name for our app. So I'm just going to call it VBA app, press create. That's going to instantly generate me an app password. Keep in mind, this app password does have these spaces in there. They're actually part of the password, so don't remove it. I'm just going to copy that. And in VBA, we're going to have two different types of variables to identify who we are to the SMTP server. We're going to have private const gmail_email as string. My email here is going to be your vbtutor.tutorials@gmail.com. Then I'll have my app password string, and I'll just paste that in. Then we're going to need 5 different constants, which are going to have variables of our server settings. So we're going to have private const SMTP server address string. It's going to be smtp.gmail.com. We're going to have 5 total variables. We're going to have our port. We're going to have use SSL. Have send using, and authentication type. Authentication type is an integer. Sorry, is send using and the port. And use SSL is going to be a Boolean value. Our port will be 465. Use SSL is going to be true. Send using will be 2. This is telling it that we're sending via SMTP. And authentication type is 1. This is just going to be basic authentication, which is using our email app password. Then we're going to create a very similar routine to what we did for Outlook. We're going to do public sub send email _SMTP. And parameters for this are going to be bival subject string. We're going to have email body as string. The email here isn't going to be HTML. SMTP doesn't allow you to have HTML email bodies, it's just going to have plain text. And the next parameter is going to be the recipient as a string. Optional CC, LCC as string. We don't have the option to display emails when sending them via SMTP, so we'll omit the display email Boolean, and then we'll just jump straight to the attachments. As again, a variant, we're going to handle that as either a string or a function. So as I said, in here, we're going to be using late binding. So we use dim cdo config as object. If you do want to use early binding for SMTP, then you'll need to add the reference to the Microsoft CDO for Windows 2000 library. The next object we'll need is going to be dim cdo message object, and then we need a schema string. CDO config, set that. You got to create object, it's going to be cdo.configuration. Then we're going to have the message is going to be cdo.message. And finally, we set the schema. So the schema refers to a website from Microsoft. So we'll just paste that in here. It's going to be http schemas.microsoft.com/cdo/configuration. And I do end this with a /, which just makes it easier in the next steps. With our cdo config fields, we need to add all of this information, all this server information to our configuration. To do that, we add .item, we pass in the schema, and SMTP use SSL, and then we're going to use this variable, this constant that we provided up the top, as the value for that. So we're basically going to need to pass in all this information as different fields. So I'll paste this down 6 more times. Here we're going to need SMTP authenticate, SMTP server, SMTP server port. Make sure you spell all those correctly. We send using and send username, send password. Authenticate is going to be our auth type variable. Our server will be the server address. Our port is obviously going to be the port. Send using, going to be our send using variable. Our username is going to be our Gmail email address. So we'll pass that in there. And then our Gmail app password. And then finally, we just update those variables so that they're committed to the cdo config. Close that end with statement. And next, we actually set up the email message itself. So this is going to be with cdo message with. In here, we set the configuration for that message to our cdo message item. So we've created this cdo config using all these fields. We've updated that cdo config to apply all those fields, and then we add that configuration to the message. Then we use to, that's going to be our recipient. Do the same thing again. If not is missing cc, then .cc equals cc. We need to add the sender. So the sender is going to be our Gmail email address. That's not necessarily required in Outlook, but it is for SMTP. Your email won't send if you don't provide the sender. Subject, yeah, subject again. The text body, not the HTML body here, is going to be our email body. Then we can do the same thing as we did before for the attachments. So we'll just copy that from Outlook. All this information here, paste that in there. The only thing we'll need to change is the syntax for the adding the attachments. For SMTP, it's .add attachment string at. It's going to be the same thing here, except we're just adding attachment string. That's all the same. Essentially, we're just checking if that variable is missing from our parameters, then we can ignore all the attachment code. If we've got it and it's an object, so it's like a collection, then we cycle through that collection, add each item to the email. If it's just a string, so it's a single item, then we just add that single file to the email. Then finally, we just need to send that email, so .send, and we do the same thing. We just set the cdo config equals nothing and set cdo message. Clean up those two objects. Now, let's do a similar test routine here. So we copy that from Outlook, change it to test SMTP. But to send email underscore SMTP, new email via SMTP, flow from VBA, sending it to myself. So if I run that, a small error here. Oh, I need to set that to the config, not the message. My mistake. Try that again. Set it running. Sending that email, it's sent. And now in just a moment, I should receive that in my inbox. So you see we have a new email. So we've got new email via SMTP. So that's proved that we've sent the email and received it using our Gmail server. So now we've got two different methods for sending emails. We've got one for SMTP and one for Outlook. Depending on your use, you could use either of these. But let's create our own kind of email client in Excel. So I've created a worksheet here, which we have an email to, CC, subject, body. We have the option to add attachments. The attachments will list down the bottom here. And then we send the email and cancel it. If you're interested in how to actually make a form that looks like this, so you have an interactable form and these nice curved corners, then check out my YouTube video on designing Excel interfaces using merge shapes. So these buttons don't do anything yet, but let's start with adding attachments. So the logic here is going to be that I have a bunch of information down here in the E column. This is going to be the actual path that we refer to for the file. And then we have a display here, which is going to have the file name and the file size. So let's jump into our code and we'll add another module here for mod email. And we're going to have a few items here for just handling attachments. So I'm going to put them into their module as well. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to browse for attachments. So we're going to have a public subroutine browse attachments. In here, we're going to use the file dialog tool. Have the file path. It's a variant. We're going to set the file dialog equal to application.dialog and then use MSO dialog file picker. We're going to allow the user to select multiple attachments if they want, so we'll set that to true. And then we set the title of the dialog window to select files. We use if fd show equals -1, then that means that the user has actually selected some files. And we use for each file path in fd.selected items, go to the next file path, and then add attachment. We're going to create a new routine for adding the attachment, file path. Create another routine for public sub add attachment. This is going to accept our file path, so our path as a string. And what we want to do is we want to fill up a list down here of all the different attachment objects. So the way I'm going to do that is do dim target cell as range, and set the target cell equal to, and this sheet is called sheet email. So sheet email dot range. We're using the F column. Then we use rows dot count dot end cell up. Offset that by 1. So this is basically going to go all the way to the bottom of the worksheet, go up to the first cell with value in it, and then go down 1. So if we have a file in here, it's going to go all the way to the bottom, come up to the top, and then this is going to be the next cell that it puts information into. But if that target cell is in the row before 11, because 11 here, so if it's before 11, then we haven't set any attachments yet. Then we want to set the target cell equal to sheet email dot 11. This is going to be the first cell where we're going to have attachments. Then we're going to use a file system object. You can use this using Microsoft scripting runtime. We'll enable that. Again, you could use late binding for this if you wanted, but we'll just early bind as it gives us access to the IntelliSense. File system object. Then we also need a file object. We can also just set that file system object to new, just so that we don't have to separately set that. Set the file equal to fso.getFile. That's going to be file path. So now this file here has all the information from this file that we've been passed in from our out attachment. To do the target cell dot offset 0 minus 1, this is going to be in the column to the left of this cell. So if this is our cell here, 11, then we're going to have information here. So this is going to be our file path in the E column. Value equals file.path. Then in our target cell, we want the file name. Then we're also going to have the file size. So we'll round the file.size divided by 1024. This is given to us in bytes. So then we divide it by 1024 to get to kilobytes. 1 decimal point. Then we'll add AB, close off the bracket. So it's going to say how many kilobytes the file is. Now, a lot of email systems and a lot of email servers have limits on the amount of attachments that they can receive. We're going to track the total size of all of our attachments. We're going to create a public total attachments size. It's going to be as the total attachment size. We're going to end the file.size to that variable. Okay, so now we can actually add some attachments. So if we click on add attachment, we'll just right click, assign that macro to browse attachments. Click on that. Then you add a file. So I'm just going to add some video files in here. If we add just one, so that the path is there in the E column, we'll just hide that because we don't need to necessarily see that as the user. And we've got the name of the file and the size of that file itself. We want to add attachments and we want to add all of these. There you go. What if we want to actually get rid of them? Clear that out. So rather than highlighting it ourselves and clearing it, we'll just make a routine to clear attachments. We'll do public sub clear attachments. Do the same thing here to get the first cell. And because we need to clear the E column as well as the F column, we'll do sheet email.range, pass in the first cell. So you see here, range can take 2 cells. That'll go from the top left to the bottom right. Sheet email range, E11, and then the second cell is the target cell. Let's clear that. So we add attachments, we'll add all these. Then we'll run that clear attachments, and they're all gone. Right, so these are all of our routines that handle the attachments themselves. Now, what about when we want to actually send the email? So we'll go to mod email. I'm going to have a private constant here. This is going to be the maximum attachment size. This is going to be as long. Typical thing is 8 megabytes, so we'll do that. Also want to create a private public enum, which is going to be used to just determine which version of our send email that we're going to be using. So we're going to do public enum email using, I'm going to have SMTP and Outlook, different options. Close off that enum. So in here, we're just going to use public sub send email from worksheet. So we're going to be doing all of this with that sheet email. So sheet email with sheet email, end with, then we'll do if.range C2, that's our recipient here, value empty, then error.raise, we're just going to raise an error to say the object error plus 1000, send email from worksheet, this is where the error happened, and then email recipient missing. We're going to do the same thing if there's no subject. Can't send an email without a subject, so we'll do C6, that is the cell here, and we'll do subject missing. Let's change the error number. So we're going to implement some error handling here. So on error, go to error handler, exit sub, error handler, and in here we'll just error.raise VB object plus 2000, send email, and the description of that is going to be error sending email. Just pass it the description. So first we'll check if our total attachment size has exceeded this maximum size. We'll do if total attachments size divided by 1024, because this is going to be in bytes, this is going to be kilobytes, and divided by 1020 again, that's going to make it into megabytes. It's greater than the max attachment size. Statement. We'll just give them a warning. So if message box attachment size exceeds maximum, do you want to send? We'll make that VB information. Also add VB yes no. And make no the default button. So VB button 2. Title is just going to be attachments size large. So if they don't press on yes, then we can just exit the subroutine. If they do press on yes, then it'll keep going into the next part of the code. So how do we choose what we're sending the email from? So let's create a separate routine that just accepts all the parameters of both of our send options. So all the parameters of Outlook and all the parameters of SMTP, and make a single routine that we can reference, and then just all we have to do is just change what we're sending it by. So to do that, we'll do private sub send email using by val using as email using. Also have by val a subject, and all of these are going to be the same as our Outlook. So just copy this here. In here, all we're going to do is select case using, so referring to this variable, which is of our custom enum here. So on the case that they've selected SMTP, do mod smtp.send email with SMTP, pass in the subject, email body, HTML, recipient, CC, and V attachments. Use the same thing for Outlook. In the case of that we've selected Outlook as the method that we're using the send with, then all we need to do is just also have display email there. Mod Outlook. So then we end that select block. Now we have a single method that we can use to send an email, and all we have to do is just change the method that we're sending it with. So send email using, I'm going to use Outlook. Using range C6 as the subject. And I have range C8, which is going to be the body of the email. 2 is going to be the recipient. And 4 is going to be the CC. Now, if no errors happen during that routine, then it's going to trigger our error handling, which we've defined here, and it's going to jump down to this. If it gets past that, then that means it's successfully sent. So we can do message box, email sent, and then we just need to clear that email. So we'll add in another routine to just clear that email nice and easily. So public sub, cancel email. So this is going to be our cancel button. We'll do sheet email range. This is just going to clear everything from C2 to C22. So that's obviously just everything from here all the way down to here. We also refer to our mod attachments and clear attachments and set the total attachment size to 0. That just resets the email to its sort of default state. And we can call that once we've successfully sent the email. And the only other thing here is where we get our attachments. So you notice here that we haven't actually set our attachments to anything. So I'm going to set v attachments equals to get attachments. This doesn't actually refer to anything yet, but we're going to create that now. We'll make this again in our mod attachments. So we'll do a public function get attachments, and we're going to return this as a collection. Because remember, if we have a collection, then it's going to cycle through each item in the collection. If there's only one item in the collection, if they've only got one item, then it's still going to cycle through that collection, but it's obviously only going to cycle through once. So in here, we'll do the same thing again as where we added the attachments. We'll get our target cell, except here we're only referring to the E column, because the E column is where we have our paths. So we'll create a path collection. So we'll dimension a path collection. Let's call it path col as new collection. And then we set all paths as a range. This is going to be the range where we get all of our paths from. And a file path as a range as well. I'm going to set all paths equal to sheet email dot range. Then we refer to the first cell, so sheet email dot range E11 and target cell. The target cell is going to be the last cell in the range. If we had a bunch of attachments here, it's going to get the very last attachment. And then we set everything from E11 to that last attachment, so that's our all paths range. We'll cycle through each cell in that all paths range. So you use for each file path in all paths dot cells. Next file path. And here we'll do if the file path dot value does not equal nothing. So if the cell isn't blank for whatever reason, maybe you've got a blank in the middle. And then we'll check if the file exists. So we'll do file path dot value not equal nothing. And finally, we just add that to the collection. So path col dot add file path dot value. And finally, we set the get attachments collection. So set get attachments equal to the path collection. And then this function now returns a collection of all the attachments that we've added to the worksheet. Let's test that out. So we'll go send email. Go send email from worksheet. So this is going to be the routine that we call our cancel routine. It's going to cancel email. And now we can essentially use this as our own little email client. So I'm going to do to your VB tutor at outlook.com. I'm going to do no CC. Subject is going to be hello from the worksheet. This is my first sending from. So we want to add a video file. If we try to send that email, we actually get an error there. So Total attachment size. Right, we're referring to mod size. Misspelled that. Cancel that and we'll try again. So we'll send email. Max attachment size. We've misspelled that as well. One last time. Send email. Email sent. Now in just a minute, I received that email from myself and it's got the attachment there. We've successfully sent an email using Outlook and attached a file to that. Now if we want to change that and send it via SMTP, all we have to do is this line here where we say send email using, instead of Outlook, we'll change it to SMTP. Do the same thing, so we'll send it to VBA tutor. Subject to via SMTP. Body, email sent from Excel. Add attachment, then the same file. Send email. Okay, it says the email sent. And then in just a minute, I've just received that email from yourvbtutor.tutorials@gmail.com. Sent it to me, and I've received that file. The system, you could obviously have any types of files you wanted. You could add Excel files. You could export a CSV of an existing sheet in your workbook and attach that. You could generate invoices and automatically email the invoice to the purchaser. You could do receipts. You could do any type of thing you want with this sort of system. Just need a few extra steps in place. And that's it. You've now got two different methods for sending emails. You've learnt about how to use SMTP as well as interact with Outlook objects. We've created a simple form on our workbook to send emails and attach items. And you've got a few different examples of how to use that. If you found the video helpful, then please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching. This is your VB Tutor signing out.